There I am.
Oh, okay.
There I am. I got a face made for radio. Um, so you heard Ratisha's voice? Is it coming through loud enough?
She seems to be fine, but
Okay.
if not, I'll raise it
You'll
up a little
bump
bit.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. When do you have to pick up Danny?
As soon as she calls,
Okay.
which could be in a couple minutes.
All right.
She doesn't ever tell me like 10 minutes ahead of time.
Rob, if Gene's not here, can you run the music? Okay.
Yeah, it's already set. All you got to do, yeah, either there or there, and then USB. Yep. In fact, we're going to start. Ready to start now, or you want to wait?
Wait a minute. 1 minute.
Let me know when you're ready.
Now.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's 8 o'clock on Thursday night, and that can only mean one thing. It's time for the 35th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour. My name is Greg Rapport. I am the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation that provides one-to-one mentors to youth who are in need. This program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G and the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime. Doc G is behind the big board tonight. Robin is here helping us. You know, we don't spend enough time talking about some of the other great programming that happens right here every week on Hamilton Radio. A lot of the people that I talk to about the Age Out Angels Radio Hour sort of view this as a kind of a one-off podcast. And it's so much more than that. This radio station has been around for like 20 years, and it's based on a forward-thinking proposition that the potential of internet radio to reach an international audience is dramatically more pervasive compared to traditional radio. But just like traditional radio, there's a regular lineup of shows here every day and night of the week. And the following at Hamilton Radio is increasing all the time. There are, in fact, 3 separate channels on continuously to satisfy just about anyone's taste. On Monday, I just want to give you an example. Monday, the fun starts at 10 a.m. with Steve Jarrett, host of The Morning Show, and he runs from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Then it's Jimmy the K from 2:30 to 5:30. From 7 to 8 p.m., it's The Argument with Dr. Nace. And then Freestyle Freaks from 8:30 to 9:30. The fun continues long into the night, so make sure you go to hamiltonradio.net and sign in so you can take advantage of all the great programming that happens right here in this seat every single day. Now, you're welcome to call in directly to the show tonight. The number is 609-807-2492. If you're watching on my Facebook page, you can see it at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, we're going to talk about some issues that can be difficult to talk about, maybe even more difficult to hear, because our special guest in the studio tonight is Ratisha Berthier, a therapist with extensive experience working with youth who have suffered the kinds of trauma that can dangerously inhibit their ability to function in society as they start going to school and especially in their teen and adolescent years. So I hope you stay tuned and then use the information that you get here tonight to guide actions in your personal daily life. This can be very valuable in that regard. So before we begin our first story, I want you to take a moment and hit that share button on Facebook, please. We're set to begin a national recruitment drive to find mentors and partner organizations all over the country. So if you know anyone who might be interested in joining us, please give them a chance to hear this program and look us up online at www.ageoutangels.org. And you do that by hitting the share button on your Facebook page right now, or if you want to be really nice, send an email to your friends in your address book and let them know what we're doing here. Doesn't cost you anything, and you may just help a child. So it's a pretty easy way to do that. Tonight we start with a quick story about a socially conscious film studio in Hollywood, California. It's called Films with a Purpose, FWAP, which I always laugh about because it makes me think of FWAP. And FWAP is the sound that it makes when you kill a mosquito off your arm. But this is a very important company. And FWAP, Films with a Purpose, will host the compelling new documentary on aging out of the foster care system. The movie is called 21 and Done. It will premiere this Sunday, if you happen to be in Southern California, April 29th at 10 a.m. And this is at the 24th Annual African American Film Marketplace and S.E. Manley Short Film Showcase. Now, this is a two-day event, actually. It's being held Saturday and Sunday, April 28th and 29th at Raleigh Studios in Hollywood. And it's hosted by the Black Hollywood Education and Resource Center. That's Sunday morning, April 29th at 10 a.m. The film 21 and Done is being executive produced by Sandra Evers Manley, and she's the person who actually started Films with a Purpose as a way to support emerging filmmakers to write and produce films that help to inspire, bring about change, and motivate someone to take action. This is a wonderful company. This film is selected to premiere under the Social Justice Film Initiative. 21 and Done explores how turning 21 years old is a celebrated rite of passage for many young Americans, but for too many foster youth who age out of the foster care system by turning 21, this milestone that's celebrated in other households usually becomes more like a harrowing countdown and can feel more like a ticking time bomb. What should be a time of celebrating full adulthood becomes a period of anxiety, depression, and danger for many. The film presents current and former foster youth facing these unique challenges, along with the organizations outside the system that are on the front lines battling for their futures. This film is the impetus of its award-winning writer-producer. Her name is Jocelyn Scott. Jocelyn Scott is a former TV journalist, and she had covered a news story several years ago on foster youth. And she says, our society expects foster kids to be fully self-reliant as soon as they turn 21. The reality is that most of them find themselves without the necessary skills and resources to live independently. So through this film, she wanted to revisit the issue and see if the foster care system had improved. And what she discovered is something that you hear a lot here on the Age Out Angels radio hour, is that while there have been improvements, there's still a long way to go. And so we wish her luck, and if you happen to be in the Hollywood area this Sunday, please go check out 21 and Done, and then shoot me an email at greg@ageoutangels.org and tell me what you think of the film. From the Legal Intelligencer comes a story written by Jamie Gullen. The story's entitled An Innovative Way to Represent Youth Clients. And this actually takes place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is right in our backyard because we're coming from our studio near Trenton, New Jersey. This is the story of a gentleman named Ryan. And the premise of the story is pretty typical if you've been listening to the Age Out Angels radio hour. Ryan is aging out of foster care and homeless, right? You've heard this story before. But here's where there's a twist. Ryan, industrious fellow, was working hard to find a job. And in the process of trying to find a job, he learned that he had a bench warrant for retail theft. It was a retail theft citation issued to him when he was just 12 years old. Now, he never received the notice for the court date for that citation because his family was homeless at the time. There was no place to send the citation. And the bench warrant suddenly was standing in the way of Ryan getting a job and an education. This happens so often to foster youth. When they go out into the world, they find out that their credit has been ruined. And in this case, this guy's in trouble. He's got a bench warrant. So White Knight steps in, Community Legal Services Attorneys, CLS, Community Legal Services. They met Ryan at a legal clinic at Covenant House, and that's a key in this story. They met him at a legal clinic at Covenant House, and you've heard me talk about Covenant House on this show. They worked with Ryan to show the district attorney's office the strides he had made in his life. The DA's office then agreed to withdraw the bench warrant, and the case has now been expunged from Ryan's record. Ryan has since been able to secure employment, start college, and find stable housing. Go Ryan. Young people like Ryan are why Community Legal Services, CLS, there's a whole program they created called the Youth Justice Project, YJP. And YJP seeks to transform the way they provide legal services to vulnerable youth ages 16 to 24. And notice that age goes up to 24. Bless their hearts, because so many things stop at 18 or stop at 21. And what we're seeing is the period of adolescence being understood to be longer than that. And so they go from 16 to 24. Age Out Angels goes from 14 to 24. And they work with 16 to 24 who face significant challenges, including high rates of unemployment and deep poverty, homelessness, involvement in the child welfare and juvenile criminal justice systems. Through significant outreach and legal clinics in communities around Philadelphia, the Youth Justice Project aims to increase access to justice for vulnerable young people who may otherwise be completely disconnected from support, services, and legal assistance. Their program serves an important purpose. Youth unemployment rates are astronomical, up to 4 times the rates for adults. Youth in Philadelphia experience the highest levels of poverty of any age group. And this has also led to a rise in youth homelessness. In the last year, of CLS's young clients seeking assistance with benefits or employment-related issues, 40% had no income at all. Compounding these challenges, low-income youth are less likely to interact with supportive structures and services, and that, again, is why Age Out Angels exists, to help youth interact with those services. And it seems like, the less they have, the less they get. It's so good to find another organization out to change that. They are also less likely to reach CLS through traditional legal services model, where the client identifies as having a particular legal problem and then comes through an intake method. That's not how they find help. Youth face additional barriers such as school, work, family obligations, which make it difficult to travel to offices, especially during available intake hours. So what they do in the Youth Justice Project is they use a community-based model of representation. Their method of representation identifies the multiple legal problems young people may face and give them a true opportunity to stabilize their lives and move past the legal obstacles that keep them in poverty. They open the door to success by providing expungements that lead to employment and education opportunities, because you know what happens once you get a criminal record. That's with you every time you get a job. And they connect youth with public benefits that keep them safe and healthy, and help young parents provide the best care for their families. And the way they do that is they hold rotating legal clinics where their clients live, work, and go to school. And that's how Ryan got them through Covenant House. This is a wonderful, wonderful program. We wish them the best. I'm going to try to get them on the show in the future so that they can talk more about it. Now, here's a sweet little story. It comes from the Chronicle of Social Change, written by Holden Slattery, and it's called "Nourishment Was Scarce in Her Foster Home, but Plentiful at L.A. Kitchen." It's the story of Sandra Vasquez. Her first foster home taught her a hard lesson in nutrition. Listen to this. The only thing she would eat was either hot dogs, and she would have a cup of noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is in a foster home. And she said, that's all I would have with those parents. And a neighbor noticed that Vasquez was thin and lacked warm clothing and called L.A. County's Child Protection System, bringing that foster care placement to an end, for she was only 10 years old. And it was her older brother, and her younger sister, so it was 3 of them eating cup of noodles 3 times a day. The 3 siblings were moved to a much better foster home where they enjoyed plenty of food, including foods which are part of Vasquez's Salvadorian heritage. So fast forward now 16 years. Now she's 26 years old, and she's trying to make nourishing others her life work. Vasquez's passion for cooking convinced one of her mentors in Los Angeles to get her enrolled in a training program offered by a nonprofit called LA Kitchen. In operation since 2014 with a budget of $3.5 million, LA Kitchen reclaims potentially wasted food, trains the unemployed for jobs, and provides healthy meals to people in need. Its job training component, called Empower LA, teaches transition age foster youth and formerly homeless and incarcerated people food preparation and readies them for the workforce. In addition to the problems all age-outs face, Vasquez's challenges were amplified by the fact that she also had a learning disability. LA Kitchen is the latest iteration of a Mission LA Kitchen founder, Robert Egger. He's been carrying this mission out for 2 decades, starting in the nation's capital at the D.C. Central Kitchen, where he also trained and employed people who had been in prison or homeless. According to Zanetta Smith, LA Kitchen's Associate Director of Clinical and Student Services, about 50 to 60% of Empower LA students complete the 14-week program, and of those, 85% have jobs at the end. Wonderful, wonderful work, and we salute them and love them all. You can call in tonight, talk about these issues or anything else that's on your mind at 609-807-2492, and you can also write comments and questions on my Facebook page. And I hope you take a second to let me know you're out there. We're attracting between 30 and 40,000 listeners every week, and we need your help because we want to double that number in the next 12 months. So with that in mind, please share it. Tell your friends to tune into this program right now so we can spread the word by hitting that share button on Facebook, or send a mass email to your address book, and please ask your friends to share with their friends. It's that simple for you to do your part and help us spread the word. We didn't get to 40,000 listeners without the power of this radio station and your help, and we are so very, very grateful. So do it right now. Hit that share button. We're going to take a little break for just a minute, and we'll be back in 1 minute with Ratisha Berthier. Don't go away. And we are back. Sitting next to me is a lovely young lady named Ratisha Berthier. She's practicing as a social worker and works as a therapist with youth and their families in an outpatient community clinic in the Trenton area. Welcome to the Age Out Angels Radio Hour, Ratisha.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you could come. Yeah, we spoke earlier in the week, and one thing that I learned about you is that you are actually a product of Trenton, or should I say a graduate of, or an alumni.
Alumni,
of
yes.
Trenton. You grew up
Born
in
and
Trenton.
raised.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, well, we're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about trauma, but part of growing up in Trenton is considered to be traumatic today. I mean, just, the sound of gunshots and not only just Trenton, but sort of any inner city, poverty, crime, all those things are considered to be part of trauma. But it wasn't always that way. And I'm just curious, what was the Trenton that you grew up in?
That's a great question. And I do agree with you that, any inner city, you have the violence. You have all of those things going on. So Trenton is definitely not unique in that.
Right.
So the Trenton that I grew up in, and to be honest, this is where I feel like my family unit was like a bubble for me.
Oh.
I grew up with lots of aunties, lots of cousins, and my mom was very overprotective. So she kept a tight leash on my sister and I. So we weren't out and about. We stayed very close to home. If we weren't in our house, we were at an aunt's house. Right. If we played outside, it was in front of the window so that she could see us. So we didn't. Growing up for me, I did not experience a lot of the community violence that or witness or see or hear about because I
Right.
was kind of
That contributes to the whole trauma picture.
right. I was
Yeah.
just kind of
Good.
shielded from that. My
Good for
mom
you.
and dad did a
I
great
was
job.
I was at a meeting last night with a young lady who has two aunts, right? And there's the good cop and bad cop, right?
Yes.
So they have so one aunt is the firm one. She's like cracking the whip all the time. The other aunt, she's the friend.
Okay.
And so together they double team
Mm-hmm.
this girl, and I'm sure she feels that same sense of insulation
Yes.
that you described. Although that's looking back on it. When you're 16, 17,
Right.
you don't want so
It's
much
different.
insulation,
Right.
right?
Yeah, no, my mom has 8 sisters. So
Oh, my.
I had a lot of aunts. Not all of them lived in Trenton, but a good amount of them did.
Your mother
So,
has 8 sisters.
yes.
Wow. We should have a moment of silence for your granddad. 8 sisters, nine girls. Oh my. So all right, so what drew you to social work?
So that's, the long and short of that is I always knew that I wanted to work with kids. And there was just, that was just
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
But I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with kids. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. And to be honest, I didn't really understand what social workers did. So just
Okay.
in trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do with kids, social work wasn't on my radar in the beginning.
Mhm.
And it wasn't actually until I experienced some personal things in my life that I was able to identify what it was that I wanted to do with kids.
Uh-huh.
And so that, I don't mind sharing, was my father was actually murdered. He lost his life by a kid at the time. And I say kid, he was in his, I think, 20s.
Mhm.
He was...
That's
he
kid
tried-
to me. I mean,
Right.
the older I get, the younger they
Yeah.
look.
And so my father was assaulted by this guy. This guy tried to rob him, and my father lost his life that way. And so fast forward to the trial where, after they found out who did it and caught this guy, he went to trial. And just hearing about his life experiences and the trauma
Yeah,
that he
yeah,
experienced, the neglect
Right.
that he experienced as a kid,
Mhm.
there was just something that I felt. There was compassion that I felt for him
Wow.
at that time that I wasn't trying to. It was just there.
Right.
And at that moment, I realized that's the type of work that I want to do. I want to work with kids that have experienced that type of stuff.
That's interesting. There's different ways you can go. I mean,
Right.
you actually just described sort of the scenario for how Batman started, but instead you went in a compassionate,
Right.
a completely compassionate direction. That's a heartwarming story, but boy,
Right.
what a root cause.
Well, and
you know?
like I like to look at that as, even so that was a traumatic experience for
Yes.
me and my family.
How old were you?
I was in college.
Okay. All right. So it's not like you were like 8 or
No.
9 or
I was
something
in
like
college
that.
at that time, in undergrad. But I like to look at that as the gift that came from that trauma.
Yeah.
Being able to identify something that I wanted to do in a positive way as a result of that.
Yeah,
And I
that's-
think that's the goal of anybody that has, suffered something traumatic is to be able to, at some point, be able to find the gift in it.
You found the love in it. Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing. So I know you worked in a group home, an
Yes.
inpatient group home. Was that your first job in the biz?
So, let's see. Yes, post grad school, that was my first gig.
That must have been traumatic.
Well,
Wow.
Well,
Well, you do a lot of practicum work when
right.
you're
So I
when
had
you're in grad school.
internships
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about what it was like working in the group home.
Okay, so it was what I expected, I think.
You were young.
Well, one of my internships was not inpatient, but a partial hospital program where the kids, instead of going to school, they were in that program all day for
Yes,
pretty much
yeah.
school hours, getting treatment in groups, doing therapy. And so that was kind of the closest thing to a group home experience for me.
yeah.
So I had experienced that. So I kind of felt like I knew I had an expectation of what it would be like. But it was intense at times,
Yeah.
you know, because a lot of the kids in the group home had spent most of their childhood lives in and out of treatment programs, in and
Right.
out of therapy, in and out of different types of group home scenarios.
Mhm.
So, you know, you had that population, and then you had, you know, some of the kids who had homes, you know, had families that were supportive, but the behavior was just so out of control. Family couldn't really support
Couldn't
them.
deal. Yeah.
And so that was the only alternative that they had.
Mm-hmm.
So we had, you know, kids that came from that, you know, situation as well.
I was just talking to someone who's in a 40-hour-a-week program. They went from like 9 to 5,
Wow.
5 days a week into that program to try to deal with their issues. And I asked, what are the other people like? And the answer that I got was, everybody's kind of different. There are some people who are getting over drug addictions. There are other people who are getting over traumas. Some people just have anxiety. I mean, we get so busy caught up in cause and effect scenarios, we sometimes forget, I think, that some kids just have issues. They have issues when they're young. They have issues when they're older if they don't get treatment. They have anxiety. They have fears. They have reasons that their head takes them to a different place than normal. And really, I think they wouldn't get any treatment at all until it affects their behavior.
Right. And and a lot of times too, when the behavior is out of control, and this is in the cases where the trauma is the root of the acting out. I find a lot of times they may be getting treatment, but the root of the behavior is not being treated. So they're not getting the trauma that's underlying the acting out is not being dealt with. And so even though they're being treated, the behavior is not really changing because the root of it is not being addressed.
Sure.
You know?
I mean, and I suppose there's something to be said for behavior, just behavior change. Like, if you have a gun to your head, put the gun down.
Right.
But of course, that doesn't address the reason the gun is, to your head sort of in the first place.
Right.
So what did you have to do to get into that group home?
As far as working there?
No. As far as being a patient there. You went to school, you devoted your life. That's how you got there.
I thought you were talking about how did I get there.
No.
So the kids that were there, in order to get into that group home, they had to, let's see, a couple of situations. One, and I'm trying to think of the simplest way to explain it, because New Jersey has a whole process for how they go about.
While you're thinking that through, I should tell you that listeners are sending their condolences about your dad.
Oh, thank you.
Their hearts are sort of pouring out over.
Oh, that's so sweet.
We're getting messages from and a lot of people are out that. I think Andre knows who you are.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Andre says hi. Scott's out there. KT is out there. I think you probably know who that is.
Yes, so
too.
Andre is my husband.
Oh, okay.
And Katie is
Hi, Andre.
one of my best friends.
Yeah, I'm glad they're writing in. Share this, KT and Andre. Hit that share button on Facebook, okay? And let's let Ratisha be viewed by a larger audience. So there are different mechanisms by which.
Right. So New Jersey has a process for how it's called system of care. So not to complicate it, but there is a process that happens for kids that are in the system that need to get into group homes.
Okay.
But the most basic reason why is they either don't have a home environment that is safe, and that could be because of their behavior or someone else's behavior.
Right.
So they either don't have that, or That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
They don't have that. And there's a number of different reasons why.
Oh,
and
goodness.
so,
It touches your heart, you know, and so you were always, I guess, sort of moving towards working with youth.
yes.
That's always been your thing.
yes. So
Okay.
even in grad school, that was my focus. Just learning as much as I could about trauma was always.
You know, we
my
hear a
focus.
lot of times if you discipline a child, the first thing they'll say to you now is, I'm calling DCF, you know, and I'm turning you in, Mom. But a parent can also make that phone call, right?
Yes.
That's a two-way street.
It sure is.
Okay, so remember that out there. If your children threaten to call DCF on you, tell them that that's, you know, something that you can do as well. Could we talk for a second about when it's not trauma?
Okay.
You know, because it's not always trauma,
Right.
right? Not every child has a trauma history,
Right.
right? And I get there's a difference between having issues, which we all do to some extent,
Right.
probably, and suffering the effects of complex trauma. So can you talk a little bit about that? What's an example of just an issue, and what does it mean to have trauma?
Okay. So an example of having an issue. So, and we're talking about kids here. So let's say mom and dad are going through a separation.
Okay.
So a child in that situation is going to, not all, but may feel like it's their fault, or they may feel like they had something to do with the split up.
Oh,
They
yeah.
may feel torn between mom or dad. So a parent could seek out some therapy just to get that child some help to work through some of the things that they're feeling
That
about
problem.
that situation,
Right.
right? So that could, and they could be acting out in school because
sure.
of that. They could have some anxiety about that.
I
or
saw
some
it all the
fear.
time. Yeah, when I was a teacher, I saw it all the time.
Yeah. So that is an example of, a child going to therapy for quote unquote an issue
Right.
that may not necessarily be a trauma.
And then given a chance to heal.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Having the opportunity to just work through their feelings, talk through that, whatever is going on.
And then complex trauma.
So that's a good question. So can I just take a step back and
Okay.
just kind of define what trauma is?
All right.
So that word is kind of thrown out there. And if you Google that word, you'll get different kind of definitions. I mean, they all kind of say the same thing, but there are some differences in that definition depending on which website you're going on to.
And I want you to hold that thought because we have to take a break here.
Okay.
Okay? And we're going to come back with what trauma is. Back in a minute. Hit that share button on Facebook. Please do it right away while we're on break. And we'll be back with Ratisha. And we are back with our guest, Ratisha Berthier. And before we get back to Ratisha, I just want to thank all the people who made donations to Age Out Angels this week, especially Danielle Taylor and Stephen Hand. We thank you both very much. And remember, every time you purchase something from Amazon, you could be making a donation to Age Out Angels without spending a penny more. You heard it correctly. It doesn't cost money. You know how when you go to Amazon, you usually get a little pop-up that offers you a chance to go to Amazon Smile. Well, if you make your purchase through Amazon Smile, you can designate Age Out Angels as your donation organization. And without it costing you more, a portion of your purchase will go to help children who need it the most. And if you want to friend me on Facebook, I can send you a link that will take you directly to our designation and save you a few clicks along the way. Also, I want to make you aware of a new program being offered at Age Out Angels. And it is called Creative Visualization, and it actually, you may find this interesting. sort of a group thing to take people back to their happy place. So the idea here is that, you know how negative past
Right.
things, and we're going to talk about it, how they really affect, current behavior. But if you can summon up a happy feeling in place of that,
Yes.
sometimes that can be very therapeutic.
Right.
And that's a new program that we're offering at Age Out Angels
That's awesome.
through our psychologist.
Wow.
And it's kind of cool.
That sounds awesome.
So if you're interested in that, please hit me up on Facebook and let me know. So let's get back to Ms. Berthier. You were about to tell us what trauma is.
Right. So I would pretty much define trauma as an event, right, or a series of events, or even a set of circumstances that a person experiences as physically or emotionally distressing or even life-threatening.
Right.
Or even that also has lasting adverse effects on that person's emotional, physical, spiritual, social well-being. And there are a couple of different categories of trauma, right? So there's acute trauma, there's chronic trauma, there's complex trauma, and then there's vicarious trauma. So,
Vicarious is when it happens to someone else.
well,
right?
vicarious is, yes. So you kind of, through working with, and this is big in the field, but in working with people who have trauma, you're hearing these stories.
Right.
It does have an impact
Yes,
on
yes,
you.
yes.
So that could be a therapist, that could be, even first responders. Seeing stuff like that. Just being impacted by other people's experiences that you're coming into contact with on a continual basis.
I wonder about that myself sometimes. I mean, because I'm, working with people and I'm hearing stories about rape and, all kinds of stuff like that. And I'm never, 100% sure where the balance is between am I supposed to be acting clinical, which means I have to sort of turn my heart off a little bit, in order to manage my own affect.
Right. So in the work that you do, right?
Yeah,
With your,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, I think it's
turned into a therapy session, ladies and gentlemen. I need help, Ratisha.
Well, I think that's where, it's important to have boundaries and to have ways that you, in a sense, leave work at work.
Right.
And so how do I do that? I do that, but I don't necessarily get into details of, or even talk about clients outside of work.
Right.
Because it's there. Just because I don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not there in my
Right.
head. But
Right.
that's just kind of one of the ways that I create a boundary around that.
Right.
And just having ways that, having things that you love and enjoy,
Beautiful.
that help you to kind of mitigate that, because it does impact you.
You find your happy place.
Yes, I
This is
do.
what you have to do.
Yep.
So how do you treat it? How do you treat trauma in a child or adolescent?
Well, so with me, every trauma therapist has different approaches to treating trauma. But for me personally, I think the most important thing is developing that therapeutic relationship, because creating that safety is key, is critical.
Right.
Without that, no one, especially someone who's been traumatized, is going to feel comfortable or open talking about or working through some of that stuff. So that's the first critical piece, is being able to, from day one, first session, connect with the client and kind of disarm them and help them feel like, okay, I think this is a safe place for me. And the second thing I like to do, starting with first session, is just getting a really complete history. And that happens over time. Like, you don't get the whole history in the first session, but,
Right.
Getting as complete of a story as I can. And I let all of my clients know very early on in the first session that trauma is my area of specialty.
Okay.
And I think And what I found is that that disarms them, and it gives them permission to even say sometimes in the first session that there is some trauma there, where I don't think that would have happened if they didn't know that that is an area that I do focus on. That's an area that I have training in. That is an area that I
Right.
focus in on, you know. So I let them know from the very beginning. And I've experienced, you know, clients even in the group home where they've had choices of different therapists, but because they knew from the beginning that my area was trauma, they knew that that was something that they had. They wanted to work with me for that very reason.
They know you're the specialist for that.
Right.
You're the go-to
Right.
for that.
Right.
So do you have is this just, you know, through talking, or is there like a test they take, or you know, a checklist?
Yes, so I definitely do a trauma screen with all of my clients, because you're not going to necessarily get a person to just outright say some of the things that they've experienced in their
Right.
history. So I like to get a trauma screen with all clients, no matter what the reason is they're coming in for. I mean, the reason they say they are coming in could be anxiety or just acting out at school, but I'm still going to get a trauma history where I'm asking them.
What kind of questions is on that?
So the questions are basically, so there are 23 different types of traumatic events that a person could have experienced on this screen. And so they're answering yes or no, and I let them know that I'm going to just ask if they experienced it or witnessed it or heard about it. I'm not getting any details right now, so I let them know. I'm just asking if you.
Just a yes or no
Right.
kind of thing to
Right.
start with. So
Right.
you can zero in.
Yes.
You know, you're not treating them for trauma from a car accident if, you know, what they saw was a gunshot or
Right.
something.
So, you know, right from the beginning, I'm going to find out of the 23 traumatic events on this screen, which ones they've experienced. And then from there, I'm going to find out if any of those things are bothering them right now, and which ones are bothering them the most. And so I'm getting that information as we go.
Yeah.
And then from there, I can ask about symptoms and even find out if they do have PTSD or
Yeah.
they're just suffering from some symptoms from the traumatic event that they may have
It
experienced.
sounds like a really surgical approach you're taking here. It's pretty cool.
It is, but it's awesome. It really helps to get that information.
And you, like, they could be suffering from the symptoms of PTSD,
Right,
but not necessarily have PTSD.
right.
How does that work?
Okay, great question. So we've all experienced something that was distressing
Sure.
in our lives.
Yeah.
You know, not everyone has experienced something that they consider life-threatening, but we've all, in a sense, have experienced something traumatic. And so it's normal after experiencing something traumatic to have some residual from that. To, I don't know, I think when we were talking, I shared about just being in a car accident one time. I think, I slid on ice, and I didn't get hurt or anything, but slid on ice, had a car accident. And so, you know, a couple of days after that, you know, when I got into the car, I felt a little jumpy. It was just, you know, felt a little fluttering in
Yes.
my heart. You know, so that is normal. Any traumatic experience afterwards, you may feel a little nervous. You may have a dream, or you may, you know, just have some of these feelings that eventually pass on their own. You
Yeah.
may feel afraid of that thing, whatever it was, but in time that passes.
Right.
So with full-blown PTSD, that doesn't happen. You almost stay stuck. Those symptoms are always there.
I see.
So you can have symptoms without having full-blown PTSD.
Okay, so that's a situation where the symptoms are there, then they pass.
Right.
But
With full-blown PTSD, those symptoms have not passed after the traumatic event is over.
Right.
You are continuously suffering from those traumatic
Yeah.
symptoms.
And I guess when we're older, we kind of self-heal, right, to an extent. Like when we're children, we have a caregiver maybe who's helping us heal. And I suppose some of the children that you see don't have that caregiver who helps them heal.
Well, so in the outpatient clinic where I'm working, the parent, a caregiver, is
there.
actually bringing the child in.
They're there.
So
yeah.
they have that. I find a lot of times, parents, we don't come with, parents aren't given a handbook.
Yeah, they might not know how.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you don't know how to help a child through
Yeah,
some of the
yeah.
things that they may be experiencing that have been traumatic.
So so how do you help them now? Do you have treatment method, like a methodology that you?
Yep. So there are a number of different types of trauma treatment approaches out there, and two of the ones that I am trained in, that I believe in 100%, are really effective with kids. One is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes, so that is
It's a mouthful.
TFCBT
TFCBT.
for short.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is eye movement and desensitization. EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. I always stumble over saying that because it's a mouthful.
Okay, it's okay because our listeners just had their heads explode. So let's go back to TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So how does that work?
Yes. Okay. So that is a treatment approach that is very gentle with kids as
sweet.
young as 5 up through 18. That's the age range that it's been tested on and proven to be really effective with. And it really helps the child, even before talking about in detail what they experienced, it helps them to develop coping skills, positive coping skills, to help them to manage the strong feelings that they are having in their body. So it's teaching them coping skills. It's teaching them, it's educating them on trauma and what that specific event was. And
It addresses the root cause.
right. So it's providing education. It is helping them to develop positive coping skills, and it's empowering them to be able to talk about it, or through either writing a story, or they could draw about it, or there's lots of different ways that they can actually talk about the trauma. But empowering them to really talk about what happened and learn that they can do that without being overtaken by emotion. Like they are strong enough to be able to talk about it, and they will be okay.
Because a good way to avoid ever healing is to avoid
Talking about
Talking
it. And
about
that's big with PTSD.
Right.
A big part of why people stay stuck in those symptoms is the avoidance of the trauma.
Okay.
Avoiding thinking about it, avoiding talking about it, avoiding anything that reminds them of it is part of what keeps people stuck in PTSD. So with TFCBT, the one of the points is helping them to be able to talk about
But it's not, and it's not all talk, right?
Right.
I mean, there are other.
Yes. So it could be through art, drawing the trauma, drawing what happened in a way that they can. It could be whatever the child is able to do, but being able to share their story in whatever medium of choice is big, and also teaching them how to be safe in the future. And the parent or caregiver is a huge piece in that treatment approach.
And are they frequently in the sessions? Like
Yes.
This is holistic in nature.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that the parent or caregiver, if they are in there and supportive, is the biggest key to helping that child heal. It's not the therapist.
Absolutely. So, you must hear horror stories.
You will be surprised. It's really mind-blowing what some kids have experienced. It really is heartbreaking.
And they're with caregivers. I mean, you can only imagine what a homeless kid,
Right.
experiences when you think about, a child who's actually with a caregiver who
Right.
is, still experiencing that sort of.
Yep. I've heard stories where I sit there and I'm, just thinking, how is this possible that somebody has endured, and experienced this?
Yeah, how are they still
It's
on their
crazy.
feet?
Right.
Right?
So it's amazing. It's amazing to see their strength. Also, they may be suffering from these symptoms, but I see a lot of strength in these kids that have suffered some of this
Do you see?
terrible thing.
Do you see, like, in the behavior that's considered bad or maladaptive or whatever that gets them there, that a lot of that behavior is reenactment?
Well, so yes, a lot of that behavior is reenactment, but mainly that behavior is what was necessary to help them to survive within that environment
Yes.
or survive that experience.
Mm-hmm. It's how they cope.
Right. But so now that they are out of that environment or out of that experience, that behavior is no longer serving them, is actually
Yeah,
hurting
yeah.
them. And so that's a part of the treatment, is helping them to see that and teaching that.
In 30 seconds, is this problem bigger than we have the capacity to serve? Do you see it in your experience? Is this a growing?
No,
Problem?
I don't think so, because, in saying that feels like there's no hope. So I don't feel like that. I
Okay.
do believe we have the capacity to serve and to help. I think as mental health professionals, we need to really understand it and be trained in approaches that really work.
Yeah.
When you're working with kids and you're not really using approaches that work, then it's not really helping them to resolve what the root is.
And you have a shot at changing, like, the course.
Right. Changing their whole life trajectory
Yeah.
by helping them to heal and resolve
Yeah.
their trauma. I believe that totally.
Absolutely. That's a very beautiful thing. Ratisha Berthier is my guest. We're going to take a little break. I'll be back with some very, very interesting stories in just a minute. Thank you so much.
You're
It was
welcome.
wonderful.
You gonna replay it again? Oh, okay.
And we are back. Ratisha Berthier, what an interesting person. Few final stories that I have for you tonight. There's a study, the Midwest Evaluation of the Adult Functioning of Former Foster Youth. There was a study conducted at the University of Chicago, and it followed the lives of more than 600 children aging out of the foster care system in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. In 2010, when they were ages 23 and 24, only 48% were employed, and their average yearly income was $12,864. And if I could see that sign again, I just wanted to see who else is listening to the show tonight. I know that Karima, Karima, Sandra, Eddie, Jeff, Lisa is out there, Priscilla. I hope you guys are all hitting that share button on Facebook. This is very, very important. Karima, now that I know how to say your name, I can say it over and over and over again and beg you to hit that share button on Facebook. So 48% were employed, and they were making like $13,000 a year. Their peers in the general population had 75.5% employment and earned on average of $20,349 per year. A California study conducted by the same researchers in 2008 had similar results. Foster youth were 56% less likely than their peers to be employed at age 24. These are real numbers, ladies and gentlemen, and we have to do something about this. So, when's the last time you talked about Fargo, North Dakota? But there's a fascinating story here, and I love these people. This is from the Valley News Live in Fargo, North Dakota. Kids aging out of the foster care system may seem like an invisible problem, but its effects can be seen throughout the community. This is a story. This is the price you pay if you don't help people. 20% of the kids who become too old to stay in the foster care system are instantly homeless. Without a support system in place, half of them will end up addicted to drugs or alcohol. Within 2 years, nearly half of the young adults who have aged out of the foster care system will end up in jail. And, so you know what that means? That means 80% of the kids who age out of foster care are not homeless. And that's a good thing. And that number, I'm sure, is up, over the years. So there are many good things happening, but it's those 20%. We need to help those 20%. When kids are aging out of the foster care system, they become homeless and they have nowhere to go, and they get mixed in with the wrong people. They could end up committing crimes. They could end up in jail. And this is according to Christy Johnson, the housing coordinator at something we'll talk about in a second called the F5 Project in Fargo, North Dakota. If you lack a GED, she goes on, if you lack a high school diploma, if you lack sufficient income to maintain things, then you might start to look at other ways to maintain a living that might not be legal. So YouthWorks is the name of the organization, provides housing to homeless youth in Fargo, and the group says a large number of the people they help come right out of the foster care system. 41% of the youth that they're serving in YouthWorks are former foster care youth, and so they see both locally and then looking at the studies a really significant connection between foster care involvement and youth who struggle with homelessness. Now, YouthWorks has a new ally in the fight, and that is the F5 Project, opening up a home specifically for kids too old for foster care. The house will be home to 6 young adults between the ages of, are you ready, 18 and 26. Earlier, I was so happy because the program went up to age 24. Now we're seeing this program in Fargo going up to age 26. This is a wonderful thing. The Ann Casey Foundation wants it to go up to 29. We're going to move them into the house, and we're going to provide things like transportation and helping them find a job, and filling out their first resume. A lot of them are really resourceful and are very wise, and they know how to take care of themselves. And what has to happen is that those talents are redirected towards positive things. So hats off to you in Fargo, North Dakota. That's pretty wonderful. Finally tonight, we have a story from the American Prospect newsletter. And the story is called Inside Game, How Foster Care Was Changed Forever. And it's written by a gentleman by the name of Daniel Hempel. And Mr. Hempel is a name that we're going to start to get used to here. He is indeed a heavy hitter in the child welfare world, and he spends a lot of time working with legislation and things like that. And this is a story about the Child First Act that was recently enacted, and how it almost wasn't. And so the subhead here is how a determined bipartisan group, you don't think that senators and representatives can work together, but this is a bipartisan group of House and Senate staffers, bucked congressional dysfunction and helped steer a landmark child welfare bill to final passage. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon was furious and heartbroken. Nearly 3 years after Wyden launched an overhaul of the country's foster care system, the bipartisan legislation he had championed was dying. At 2:47 a.m. on a December morning in 2016, Wyden, the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, stepped into the well of the Senate to plead with his colleagues to pass the sweeping Family First Prevention Services Act that he had crafted alongside the committee's chairman, Orrin Hatch, a Utah Republican. The measure would free up federal funds to help families at risk of losing their children to foster care. For decades, child welfare advocates have argued that Washington had created a perverse incentive to actually tear families apart. The money was going, the federal money was going for after the child was removed from the home instead of preventive measures to keep the child from being removed from the home. And of course, we all know that once there's trauma in the home, then you rip the child out of the home, that doubles the trauma, right? Since the federal government started funding child welfare programs in 1961, almost all of the billions of dollars in reimbursement sent to the states had done the opposite, keeping kids in foster care or helping them through adoption rather than preventing the breakup of biological families. This is an amazing story. Arguing that the bill was an example of principled bipartisanship, Wyden, likely aware that his request to move the bill forward would fail, promised to not give up, even though the 114th Congress would soon be over, and the partisan acrimony that poisoned legislative debates would continue into the next session. Despite his pleas at 2:56 a.m., Republican Senator John Boozman of Arkansas objected, and with that challenge, the Family First Prevention Services Act was technically dead. But that is not how the story ends. Instead, this is a tale of a rare combination of stealth and persistence among a bipartisan team of Capitol Hill staffers who kept the bill alive. And you know how they did it? They attached it to the $300 billion spending bill that President Donald Trump recently signed. That he signed that to prevent a government shutdown, you know? And lots of times we hear about things, what do they call it, fat, that gets tagged on to a bill, you know, for spending purposes that really has no purpose. In this case, this got tagged onto a bill to do a lot of good. And there's a lot more in this story, and if I had more time, I could tell you, and perhaps I will in future episodes. But there you have it, congressmen working together to help children, and it makes you feel wonderful when you hear that. So there we are, another hour talking about youth who should matter more in our political and economic discourse than they do. And we thank you so much for tuning in and maybe helping us spread the word by sharing. I hope you hit that button. Next week, Lynn Antonini is our special guest, and she has an amazing story to tell you, so don't miss it. So until next week, let's make this week the best week ever. Good night.